The morning sunlight filtered through the soft white curtains of our living room, wrapping everything in a warm, golden glow. I stood by the kitchen counter, stirring coffee, watching my husband, Marcus, scroll through his phone as he hummed quietly to himself. That was our routine, simple, steady, filled with unspoken comfort. He would leave for work by 8, kiss my forehead, and remind me not to overwork myself at the design studio. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, a balance of laughter, dreams, and late-night talks about building a future together. Sometimes, when I looked at Marcus, I felt like I had found the kind of love people write stories about: gentle, patient, and grounding. My friends used to say I was lucky, and maybe I was. We had struggled in the beginning, but now everything felt right. Or so I thought. It started with a phone call, one that shattered everything I believed was unbreakable. It was late in the evening, rain drumming softly against the windows. Marcus had gone to a business trip in another city, and I was curled on the couch when my phone rang. "Mrs. Harper?" The voice on the other end was calm but heavy. "There's been an accident." For a few seconds, I couldn't process the words. My mind refused to accept what they meant. The world blurred, sounds disappeared, and I remember only one image: Marcus's smile that morning, frozen in my mind like a cruel reminder of what I'd just lost. The funeral felt like a haze. People came, whispered condolences, and left. But I remained frozen, holding on to memories that refused to fade. Nights were the hardest. The silence next to me screamed louder than any noise could. I tried to convince myself I'd find peace eventually, that time would heal, but deep down, something inside me felt unsettled, as if his death wasn't as simple as everyone said. A week after the funeral, I received an envelope with no sender's name. Inside was a small flash drive and a single note that read, "He wasn't who you thought he was." My hands trembled as I plugged the drive into my laptop. The video showed Marcus in a meeting room, handing over what looked like confidential files to a woman I'd never seen before. They talked in hushed voices, and then my heart stopped. They kissed. My breath caught in my throat as the pieces of my life started to rearrange themselves into something darker. Anger began to replace the grief that had consumed me. Who was that woman? Why was Marcus betraying me? I replayed the video over and over, hoping to find some mistake, some reason that would make it all make sense. But the more I watched, the more I realized I had been living a lie. Days turned into nights as I dug deeper. I searched his office drawers, his old laptop, his bank records, and slowly the truth began to surface. The woman's name was Claire, a financial consultant Marcus had been working with on a project. But what I found next made my stomach turn: multiple transactions transferring money to her account. Large amounts, hidden under fake business names. It wasn't just an affair. It was betrayal on every possible level: emotional, financial, and moral. Everything we built together had cracks I'd never noticed, and now they were splitting wide open. The man I thought was my partner, my protector, had built an entire secret life behind my back. I remember sitting on the floor that night, surrounded by papers, feeling the weight of every broken promise crash over me. The sadness began to shift into something sharper: a fire I hadn't felt before. If Marcus had been alive, I would have demanded answers. But he was gone, leaving me to face the wreckage alone. Still, deep in my chest, I knew I couldn't just walk away. Someone else knew the truth. Someone sent that video, and whoever they were, they wanted me to see this. Maybe they were warning me, or maybe they were challenging me. Either way, I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. Marcus's death had taken my peace, but his betrayal gave me something unexpected: purpose. As I stared at the last line of the anonymous note again, I whispered to myself, "Then I'll find out who he really was." The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The numbness that once surrounded me had burned away, leaving only determination. I began tracing Marcus's digital footprint, digging through old emails and archived files. Most of his accounts were locked behind layers of passwords, but I knew him too well: his mother's birthday, our wedding date, the name of our dog, all combinations that eventually opened doors. What I found in those emails made my chest tighten. There were messages between Marcus and Claire that dated back 2 years, long before his supposed business partnership with her began. They spoke of secret meetings, money transfers, and even plans to start fresh abroad. One message stood out. Claire had written, "Once everything is finalized, we can disappear." My mind spun. What did she mean by that? And what exactly was Marcus planning to finalize? I realized then that I didn't just lose my husband. I had been living with a stranger who had plans that didn't include me. I decided to confront Claire, but I couldn't just show up at her office as the grieving widow. I needed to be smarter than that. So I reinvented myself: new hairstyle, new clothes, a new version of me that could move unnoticed. I reached out to her firm under a fake identity, posing as a client interested in financial consulting. The receptionist scheduled an appointment for the following Monday. When the day came, I walked into her office building, my heart pounding in my chest. Claire was even more beautiful in person, elegant, polished, with that quiet confidence that comes from being used to power. She smiled as I introduced myself, completely unaware of who I really was. As we talked about investment strategies, I couldn't help but study every detail: the way her hands moved, the way she laughed lightly, the faint scar near her left ear. It was surreal, sitting across from the woman who had shared my husband's secrets, pretending I was just another client. Halfway through our conversation, I slipped a small recorder from my bag onto the table. "You mentioned your partner worked with several private investors," I said carefully. "Did you ever work with a man named Marcus Harper?" Her expression faltered for the briefest moment, her fingers tightening around the pen. Then she smiled again, too quickly. "Marcus, oh yes. He was one of our clients a while back. A very kind man." The way she said was made my skin crawl. I leaned back, feigning curiosity. "I heard he passed away. Tragic accident, wasn't it?" For the first time, her voice trembled. "Yes, it was. Unexpected." There it was, fear, buried beneath her carefully composed mask. I left the office that day knowing one thing for certain: she knew more than she was letting on. And that fear told me Marcus's death wasn't as accidental as everyone believed. That night, I sat in my car outside her building, watching through the windshield as the lights in her office flickered off. She stepped outside, glancing around nervously before getting into her car. I followed at a distance, heart racing, as she drove toward the outskirts of town. She stopped at an abandoned warehouse, the kind of place that whispered secrets to the dark. A man was already there waiting for her. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his stance was firm, confident someone used to control. I recorded everything from a distance, my hands shaking. They talked for nearly 20 minutes before she handed him an envelope. When they finally left, I approached the spot where they had stood and found a torn piece of paper near the ground, with Marcus's name scribbled on it. My instincts screamed that this wasn't just a love affair gone wrong, this was something far deeper. The next day, I showed the video footage to Marcus's old friend, Caleb, who had worked with him at the company. He was one of the few people I still trusted. When he finished watching, he rubbed his temples and said quietly, "Marcus was into something shady, wasn't he?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The truth was already unfolding between us. Caleb sighed heavily and looked at me with pity. "You're walking on dangerous ground, Evelyn. If he was mixed up with people who handle that kind of money, you don't want to be next." But I couldn't stop. "They already took everything from me," I whispered. "I won't rest until I know why." He hesitated before handing me a small USB drive. "This might help. Marcus gave it to me months ago for safekeeping. Said to destroy it if anything ever happened to him." My heart pounded as I took it. That night, I plugged it into my computer and waited. The screen filled with encrypted documents, offshore account details, and names including Claire's. The betrayal ran deeper than love. It was about power, greed, and secrets people were willing to kill for. I remember that morning as if it were etched into my bones. The air was thick, not with rain or dust, but with tension. Daniel had started avoiding me altogether. The man who once used to call me every hour now barely looked at me. He left home early, came back late, and when he was home, he acted like I was invisible. The only time he noticed me was when I did something wrong or when he wanted to remind me that I wasn't good enough. But that day, something strange happened. He left his phone on the dining table, buzzing repeatedly. My instincts told me to ignore it, but the woman's name flashing on the screen caught my attention. Tiffany. My heart sank. The emoji next to her name felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I picked up the phone, and before I could even stop myself, I unlocked it. What I saw shattered every illusion I had built. Their chat was filled with flirtations, intimate confessions, and plans that stretched back months. The worst part? He had told her things he had never told me, his dreams, his fears, his love. Tiffany knew more about my husband than I did. My trembling fingers scrolled further, and then I saw a picture Daniel, smiling in a restaurant, holding her hand across the table. It wasn't the smile of a man forced into an affair. It was the smile of a man who was truly happy. I felt dizzy. The ground beneath me vanished. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Every sound became distant, the clock ticking, the hum of the refrigerator, the world itself. I wanted to scream, but instead I laughed, a hollow, broken laugh that echoed in the empty kitchen. How long had he been lying to me? How many nights had he come home smelling like her perfume, pretending it was just the scent of a colleague's office? My mind raced with questions, but deep down, I knew the truth. Daniel was gone long before I realized it. When he came home that night, I didn't confront him immediately. I watched him. I studied him. The way he avoided my eyes, how he smiled when his phone lit up, how his laughter seemed forced whenever I tried to speak. He was living two lives, and I was the ghost haunting the wrong one. A few days later, I followed him quietly, carefully. He thought he was clever, parking 2 streets away from his usual office route. I watched from my car as he stepped out, adjusting his shirt in the rearview mirror before walking into a cafe. And there she was, Tiffany. Young, elegant, carefree, everything I used to be before the years of compromise. They hugged, their bodies pressed too close, their smiles too intimate. I felt something inside me crumble, not out of jealousy, but realization. He had chosen her not because she was better, but because she was new. Because she didn't yet know the version of him that I did, the one who broke promises, who belittled when he felt small, who ran when life demanded accountability. That night, when he returned home, I asked calmly, "Daniel, who is Tiffany?" The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I repeated the question slower this time, firmer. He tried to deflect, saying she was just a client, but I had the screenshots ready. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just showed him the proof, one message after another. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, he sighed and said, "You were never enough for me, Olivia. You changed. You became dull, predictable." His words hit harder than the betrayal itself. In that moment, I realized the man standing before me was not the one I married. The man I loved had disappeared long ago, and this stranger had taken his place. I didn't respond. I simply turned around, walked upstairs, and closed the bedroom door behind me. For the first time in years, I didn't beg, didn't fight, didn't try to fix anything. I sat by the window, staring at the dark horizon, and whispered to myself, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." That night, I made a decision not to expose him immediately, not to cry over what was lost, but to plan my way out with grace and precision. I would leave quietly, but when I did, Daniel would finally understand what he had truly lost. The days that followed were a blur of silence and strategy. Daniel thought my quietness meant defeat, that I was too broken to react, too weak to confront him again. He couldn't have been more wrong. Behind every calm smile I gave him, there was calculation. I started observing his patterns when he left for work, when he texted Tiffany, how long their meetings lasted, which excuses he used when he came home late. Each detail became a thread in the web I was quietly weaving. I knew I couldn't simply walk away. Not yet. I wanted to leave in a way that would make him feel the weight of his choices. He had stripped me of my dignity, my peace, and my trust. Now I would take from him what he valued most: his reputation and control. I began with subtle steps. I visited our bank, pretending to be concerned about a joint account issue. What I found stunned me. He had been transferring money out of our shared savings into a private account under his name. The man who once said, "Everything we have is ours," had been quietly preparing to start over without me. I didn't confront him. Instead, I took copies of every document, every transaction, every digital trail he left behind. Then, I met with a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but the same one who handled Daniel's company contracts. With a sympathetic smile, she told me something Daniel never expected me to know. Our house, the one he constantly claimed as his property, was actually registered under my name because of a legal oversight when we bought it years ago. He had no idea. My lips curved into the first real smile I'd worn in weeks. Meanwhile, I continued playing the role of the oblivious wife. I cooked, cleaned, and even laughed at his half-hearted jokes. I let him believe I was blind to his deceit. He didn't notice the way I started organizing important files, or how I moved valuable documents into a secure folder at my friend Clara's apartment. Each night, as he snored beside me, I'd stare at the ceiling, whispering plans to the dark about the day I would walk away, not in tears, but in quiet triumph. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel was in the shower when his phone rang again, Tiffany's name glowing on the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. My voice was calm. "Hi, Tiffany," I said softly. The silence on the other end stretched for a few seconds before she stammered. "Who is this?" I replied, "Daniel's wife. But don't worry, not for much longer." Before she could respond, I hung up. I wanted her to know. I wanted him to know that I knew. When Daniel came out, dripping with water, towel around his waist, he looked at me, and for the first time in months, he looked scared. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice shaking. I smiled faintly. "Nothing yet." That was when he broke character. The calm, confident man became defensive, angry, almost desperate. He accused me of being controlling, paranoid, and manipulative. He shouted, slammed doors, threw accusations like daggers, but I didn't flinch. I just watched him unravel. It was almost poetic, the man who once prided himself on control now losing it piece by piece. That night, I slept peacefully. Not because everything was fine, but because I knew I was almost free. Over the next few days, Daniel tried to make amends, not out of guilt, but out of fear. He realized something was slipping from his hands, though he couldn't figure out what. He bought me flowers, took me to dinner, and even whispered apologies that sounded rehearsed. I played along, accepted his gestures, and smiled through it all, but my heart was already gone. Every time he said, "We can fix this," I thought, "No, Daniel, you can't fix what you broke." Then came the day of reckoning. I waited until he left for work, then packed my belongings, only the essentials. I left behind the furniture, the photos, the memories. On the dining table, I placed a neatly folded envelope. Inside was everything: copies of his bank transfers, screenshots of his messages with Tiffany, and a signed document from the lawyer confirming that the house legally belonged to me. At the end of the letter, I wrote just one sentence. "You told me I wasn't enough. Now you'll see how much of everything I really was." When he returned home that evening, the house was silent. My car was gone, my closet empty. He found the envelope, and from what I later heard, he went into a rage, shouting, throwing things, calling my name as if I'd come running back. But I didn't. I was miles away, sitting in a quiet apartment overlooking the city, sipping tea as the sunset bathed the sky in gold. I had no tears left, only peace. For the first time in years, the silence around me didn't hurt. It healed. And yet, deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. Daniel's downfall had only just begun. Weeks turned into months, and each sunrise felt lighter than the last. I built a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around Daniel's moods or expectations. I found a small but cozy apartment near the city center, started freelancing for an interior design company, and for the first time in a long while, I began to feel like myself again. My laughter returned soft at first, then louder, freer. I filled my days with simple joys: morning walks, fresh flowers by the window, late-night books, and quiet dinners with friends who had waited patiently for me to come back to life. Still, every so often, memories of Daniel would flicker through my mind, the man he used to be before the betrayal, before the lies. But each time they came, I reminded myself that I hadn't lost him. I had freed myself from him. One afternoon, Clara came by with her usual burst of energy, carrying a newspaper and 2 cups of coffee. She set them on the table and said, "You need to see this." I looked down and froze. There he was, Daniel's face printed on the front page under the headline, "Local Architect Faces Investigation Over Financial Misconduct." My breath caught. I read through the article carefully, and piece by piece it all came together. After I left, his company began to crumble. The private account he had hidden from me turned out to be linked to falsified transactions, and his so-called business trips with Tiffany had involved company funds. The board had launched an inquiry, and Tiffany, terrified of being implicated, had turned on him completely. In his desperation to control everything, Daniel had destroyed it all. Clara watched my expression carefully and said softly, "You did this, didn't you?" I shook my head. "No, Clara," I replied, a small smile forming. "He did this to himself. I just stopped protecting him from the truth." It wasn't revenge anymore, it was justice unfolding naturally. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt free. That night, as I sat on the balcony watching the city lights shimmer like scattered stars, I realized something important. Revenge had never been the point. Finding peace, reclaiming my voice, rebuilding the woman I used to be, that was the victory I had been seeking all along. Weeks later, I got a call from Daniel. His voice was hollow, stripped of all the arrogance and confidence it once carried. "I lost everything," he said quietly. "The company, the house. Tiffany left too." I stayed silent, letting the words settle between us. Then he asked, "Are you happy now, Olivia?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "No, Daniel," I said softly. "I'm not happy because you lost everything. I'm happy because I finally stopped losing myself." There was a long silence before he whispered, "I'm sorry." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I know," I replied. "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean I'll ever go back." And with that, I ended the call calmly, without shaking hands or tears. Just peace. Months passed, and life continued its quiet rhythm. My business grew, my confidence flourished, and the loneliness that once haunted me turned into solitude I cherished. I even started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping others find strength in their stories of loss and recovery. Each woman I met reminded me of a version of myself fragile but unbroken. One evening, as we shared stories over tea, I told them mine, not as a tale of betrayal, but as one of survival. And as I spoke, I saw something beautiful in their eyes: recognition, hope, courage. Years later, I visited the old house one last time. It had been sold to a new family, laughter spilled through the windows, and flowers bloomed where my pain once lived. I stood outside for a moment, breathing it in, then smiled and walked away. The past no longer had power over me. I had turned my wounds into wisdom, my silence into strength. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon that evening, I whispered softly to myself, "After I lost my husband, I found the courage to stand on my own, and for the first time I truly believed it."